Hello, YouTubers. Welcome to Level-Headed News. I'm your host, Brenda. The new episode of Level-Headed News. I'm getting used to this new format I'm trying out. I'm bringing you categories episodes here. Probably be several videos a day for you. But we'll group them together in categories. That way you don't have to on current events video. Here we are on the 30th day of November, last day of November. And this category is Donald Trump in the news. Articles that I have here that has to do with Donald Trump. First one I have is off of the Common Sense Show with Dave Hodges. It says, Congress passes World War III legislation despite Trump's election. Donald Trump, didn't you believe that this was the vote for peace and that he would negotiate a mutually beneficial agreement with Russia? Just when I thought the electoral process offered the people hope, I have learned that our vote means little to nothing. The case in point for this newfound pessimism lies in Trump's apparent irrelevance when it comes to going to war. I thought that a vote for Trump was a vote for negotiation instead of war with Russians over Syria. Apparently, I was wrong. Ron Paul called Hillary Clinton the war president, meaning that she would very likely, or be very likely, to get us into World War III. Clinton is well known for being the best friend of military-industrial complex. Hillary and her staff made comments regarding going to war in Syria, and Russia be damned. In addition, in debate number 2, Hillary Clinton clearly stated that she intended to impose a no-fly zone in Syria. A blind man could see that a Hillary presidency would undoubtedly put us into direct confrontation with Russia. The mystery was over. I know there would be a World War III if we ever let her get elected. Well, I mistakenly believed that if we blocked Hillary's path to the White House, our children would not immediately become cannon fodder in a world war that would start in Syria. Unfortunately, I was wrong. We're going to have war, no matter who gets elected. More on that later, because this statement assumes that Donald Trump will be president when war breaks out, and that may not be the case. Here's a look at the legislation that going to war brings us. H.R. 5732, Caesar Serious Civilian Protection Act of 2016. Sponsor is Representative Engel Elliott L., Democrat of New York. This was introduced in July 12th of 2016. Committees: House, Foreign Affairs, Judiciary, Financial Services, Senate, Foreign Relations. Latest, 11/16/2016, received in the Senate and read twice and referred to the Committee on Foreign Relations. Says tracker, this bill has the status passed House. Here are the steps for the status of legislation. Number 1 is introduced, and number 2, passed House. That's what it's done so far. Still has to pass the Senate, then the president, and become law. Not only has this declaration of war passed the House of Representatives, its ideal or identical version, except for the title, has been introduced to the Senate. SJ Resolution 29, authorization for use of military force against Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant and its associated forces, 114th Congress, 2015-2016, get alerts. Joint resolution, Senator McConnell, Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, introduced 1/2016. 1/21/16 read second time, placed on Senate legislative calendar under general orders. Action calendar number 352. Tracker, this bill has the status introduced. Case for war. The words of war are buried deep in the congressional bill. However, after much reading followed by lengthy scrolling, the concerning part of this intended congressional action can be found in Section 303 of the House bill. Section 303 reads, assessment of potential effectiveness and of requirements for the establishment of safe zones or a no-fly zone in Syria. In general, not later than 90 days after the date of the enactment of this act, President shall submit the appropriate congressional committee a report that, one, assesses the potential effectiveness, risk, and operational requirements of the establishment and maintenance of a no-fly zone over part or all of Syria, including, there's an editor's note here. It says this is an absolute declaration of war against Russian forces in Syria. A, the operational and legal requirements for United States and coalition air power to establish a no-fly zone in Syria. B, the impact a no-fly zone in Syria would have on humanitarian and counterterrorism efforts in Syria and the surrounding region. And C, the potential for force contributions from other countries to establish a no-fly zone in Syria. And number two, assesses the potential effectiveness, risks, and operational requirements for establishment of one or more safe zones in Syria for internally displaced persons or for the facilitation of humanitarian assistance, including A, the operation and legal requirements for the United States and coalition forces to establish one or more safe zones in Syria. B, the impact one or more safe zones in Syria would have on humanitarian and counterterrorism efforts in Syria and the surrounding region. And C, the potential for contributions from other countries and vetted non-state actor partners to establish and maintain one or more safe zones in Syria. For one moment, my common sense lapsed, and I believed that we might not go to war in our lifetime in Syria. This legislation shows that the intent to go to war extends much further than the preferred beliefs of Clinton. It's not likely that Trump will be around before the beginning of World War III. As I try to reconcile my belief that Trump was sincere in his stated intention to reach a peaceful accord with the Russians, I have trouble reconciling the two contradictory beliefs. History is a great teacher, and we must remember that. In part, JFK was assassinated because he would not give the globalists of his day the Vietnam War. Why should Donald Trump be any more immune to the same pressures for the same reasons as was JFK? The passage of the House version of the bill was achieved 8 days following the election. It is clear that the election of Trump had absolutely no bearing on the desire of Congress to provoke a showdown with the Russians. Will Trump be assassinated and Pence, a confirmed globalist, support free trade agreements and Obamacare, will give the globalists what they want? World War II, just like LBJ did after the murder of John Kennedy. This is also clear that a committee chair people, or try that again. It is also clear that key committee chair people in Congress have received a push to continue with this legislation, even though it flies in the face of what Trump believes. Somebody knows that Trump's beliefs about Russia are irrelevant, and that message has apparently been delivered to key members of Congress. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women are merely players. They have their exits and their entrances. William Shakespeare. The next one we have here's off of BizPack Review, and it says, is Trump ready for China's inevitable test of American power? China's worldview prompts it to probe the strength and resolve of the dominant power, and President-elect Donald Trump will inevitably be tested. In recent years, China has carefully tested and evaluated each new American president. The Leninist core of Chinese leadership thinks it makes Beijing probe assiduously for international opportunities stemming from changes in counterparts' personalities, policies, and powers. Dr. Andrew Erickson, a leading expert on China, explained to the Daily Caller News Foundation, China sees power in relative terms. One country's loss is another's gain. Weakness, even a dominant power, are vulnerabilities that can be exploited. For former President George W. Bush, his test was the 2001 Annan Island incident. On April 1st, 2001, only a few months into Bush's first term, a People's Liberation Army Navy Plan J-811 interceptor flight jet collided with a U.S. Navy EP-3E Ares II signal intelligence aircraft near Hainan Island in the South China Sea. Chinese pilot Lieutenant Commander Wang Wei died in the crash. Although it became an international incident, the crash itself was not the real test for the Bush administration. Rather, the test was the pattern of increasingly dangerous interceptions which occurred prior to the accident. The PLA plan, its recent pattern of aggression interceptions of the U.S. reconnaissance flights in December 2000, a Congressional Research Service (CRS) report notes between December 2000 and April 13, 2001, there were 44 PLA interceptions of U.S. reconnaissance flights in international airspace over the East China Sea and South China Sea. Chinese interceptor fighter jets came within 30 feet of U.S. aircraft 6 times. In 2 instances, the distance between Chinese and U.S. aircraft was less than 10 feet. Though through repeated interceptions, Beijing appeared interested in determining whether or not Washington would call its bluff. The U.S. did exactly that, and the results were fatal. Following the incident, China scaled back interceptions of U.S. surveillance aircrafts, while the U.S. did not make any substantive concessions to the Chinese. A few weeks after President Barack Obama took office, the Chinese tested him by harassing ocean surveillance ships, USNS Impeccable. China took what retired Navy Captain Raul Pedroso called an aggressive, unsafe, and unprofessional action against an unarmed naval auxiliary vessel. On March the 8th of 2009, 5 Chinese vessels, specifically a Navy intelligence ship, a government fisheries patrol vessel, a state oceanograph patrol vessel, and 2 fishing trawlers surrounded the Impeccable in international waters about 75 miles off the coast of Penang Island. The fishing ships came within 25 feet of the U.S. ship and even stopped in front of it, forcing the Impeccable to take emergency action to avoid a collision. The Impeccable returned the next day, accompanied by a guided missile destroyer, a reasonable yet temporary solution overlooking a far more complicated and troublesome problem that has continually resurfaced during the Obama's time in office. The Chinese fishing vessel dispatched to harass the Impeccable were part of China's Third Sea Force, its maritime militia. The threat has gone unacknowledged and unaddressed by the Obama administration. As Trump prepares to take office, he can expect to be tested as well, possibly by issues left unresolved by the previous administration. Beijing's longstanding opposition to key principles of international air-sea law and its growing assertiveness in the South China Sea make its view unapproved American activities there as contravening vital interest, Erickson told the DCNF. Recent evolution of bilateral friction suggests that China might test Trump by using maritime militia personnel and vessels to pose some sort of tongue-tied ambiguity, complication, and possible harassment to a U.S. freedom of navigation operation. China uses its Third Sea Force as a parliamentary force while portraying units as non-combatants. The ambiguous appearance allows China's maritime militia to engage in gray zone aggression. Make no mistake, these are state-organized, developed, and controlled forces operating under a direct military chain of command, Erickson revealed at a House Committee on Armed Services hearing in September. Trump and his team must prepare for a manifold contingencies from the start. Among them, a maritime militia challenge would stand out for the Obama administration. Failure to pave the way with basic public preparations, Erickson asserted. The administration's apparent dismissal thus far of repeated recommendations that it at least mention China's maritime militia by name to begin raising awareness can only have emboldened Beijing. This is a force that thrives within the within the shadows of plausible deniability, Erickson argued in September. China's maritime militia can only be as deceptive and plausibly deniable as we allow it to be through our own silence and our own inaction. Throughout the Obama administration, the Third Sea Force has repeatedly made its presence known outside of, or made its presence known. Outside of the incident with the Impeccable, the maritime militia was also involved in the 2011 sabotage of two Vietnamese hydrographic vessels, 2012 seizure of Scarborough Shoal, 2014 repulsion of Vietnamese vessels near a Chinese oil rig in disputed waters, and 2015 shadowing of the USS Lazen during a freedom of navigation operation. Although it has yet to do so, the Obama administration still has time to address this challenge. To avert a potential setback or crisis, the Obama administration must immediately call out China's maritime militia officially in public, share information with countries at risk, and communicate clearly to Beijing that any ships ignoring repeated warnings by U.S. vessels to desist from disrupting or harassing them will be treated as military controlled and handled accordingly, Erickson told the DCNF. Regardless of what leadership and stewardship President Obama ultimately demonstrates in this regard, Trump and his team must prepare to pass their China test. The world is watching. While Trump promised to get tough on China on the campaign trail, there is a lot of uncertainty surrounding Trump and his policies, making him a likely target for persistent probing early on in his first term. How he responds will reverberate across the region and around the world, Erickson emphasized. By firmly upholding the rules of the road, Trump has the ability to pave the way for sustainable U.S.-China cooperation within a rules-based international order. Failure to do so will result in a continuation and possibly an exacerbation of existing challenges. The next article that I have for you is off of SputnikNews.com, and this one says, New York Times columnist, FBI Director, Putin installed Trump President of the U.S. And it says, one of Hillary Clinton's biggest supporters throughout the election cycle was New York Times columnist and Nobel Prize winner Paul Krugman, is now claiming that FBI Director James Comey and Russian President Vladimir Putin installed Donald Trump. Ever since it became clear that Trump would be the next president of the United States, Krugman has been lashing out in a big way on Twitter. His latest claims may be his most far-fetched to date. On Sunday, Krugman tweeted a screenshot of Trump stating that if you deducted the millions of people who voted illegally, he would have won the popular vote, in addition to winning the Electoral College. The tweet was a portion of Twitter rant by the president-elect regarding the recount efforts of the Green Party. And it shows the tweet here. Donald Trump says, in addition to winning the Electoral College and landslide, I won the popular vote if you deduct the millions of people who voted illegally. And Paul Krugman says, so Comey and Putin installed a crazy, vindictive, can't handle the truth person in the White House. Scary. And the article goes on and says, so Comey and Putin installed a crazy, vindictive, can't handle the truth person in the White House. Scary, Krugman tweeted with the screenshot. And then Nick Short tweets, what Trump said is nothing compared to the insanity of what Paul is asserting. FBI director worked with head of Russia to install Trump in the White House. Then the article goes on and says, essentially, Krugman is implying that Trump is a crazy conspiracy theorist while sharing the unhinged theory that the FBI is collaborating with the Russian government. Naturally, Twitter users, particularly other journalists, were quick to point out the hypocrisy. Matt Bohr says, Krugman, Trump can't handle the legitimacy of the election. Also, Krugman, Putin installed Trump in a fraudulent election. Some guy named Ed Whelan says, it is great gift to Trump that left critics like Krugman are so bonkers. And the article goes on and says, this is not the first time since the election that Krugman made headlines for spouting crazy conspiracy theories about how the U.S. presidency was stolen from Clinton by Russia. It is not even the first time in the past week. Last Tuesday, Krugman went into Twitter storm rant about Russians hacking into the U.S. voting system. In a thoughtful analysis for The Federalist, Daniel Payne wrote about the damaged psyches of the left based on Krugman's unhinged rant. Payne notes that The Economist is starting to sound like a tinfoil hat wearing neighborhood crank. Krugman's flip-flop from a degenerator of crazy conspiracy theories to an eager promoter of them exposes perhaps just how fragile the political psyche of modern American liberalism is, Payne wrote. The article discussed how Clinton was all but ordained, and when it all came crashing down to hit smug progressive pundits, including Krugman, the reality was too much to accept. The election of Donald Trump, not merely an earthquake, but an extinction-level asteroid event, brought it all crashing down, and you can see that the behavior of Paul Krugman, a man who has been confronted with and is struggling mightily to accept the way the world is, Payne said. Really, this wake-up call has kind of been a long time coming. There are few columnists on the scene today more intellectually closed and pompous than Krugman, a fellow who once wrote about a particular policy debate. I have been right about everything. Even when you're right about everything, you don't write. I have been right about everything, unless you're Paul Krugman, that is. Maybe next Krugman will accuse U.S. President Barack Obama of also working with Kremlin, since on Friday he stated in no uncertain terms that the election results accurately reflect the will of the American people. The next one that we have here for you is off of USA Today, and it says former Labor Secretary Elaine Chao named Trump's transportation secretary. Former Labor Secretary Elaine Chao arrives at Trump Tower Monday, November 21st in New York to meet with President-elect Donald Trump. Elaine Chao of Kentucky, who was Secretary of Labor under President George W. Bush, was named to be the next Transportation Secretary Tuesday night by President-elect Donald Trump. Secretary Chow's extensive record of strong leadership and her expertise are invaluable assets in our missions to rebuild our infrastructure in a fiscally responsible manner, Trump said in a statement. She has an amazing life story and has helped countless Americans in her public service career. Chow was also Assistant Secretary of Transportation in the administration of President George H.W. Bush. President-elect has outlined a clear vision to transform our country's infrastructure, accelerate economic growth and productivity, and create good-paying jobs across the country, Chow said. I am honored to be nominated by the President-elect to serve my beloved country as Transportation Secretary. Chow is married to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky. Chow met with Trump last week in New York. Her appointment adds some gender and ethnic diversity to the Trump lineup, which has largely been made up of white men. Chow was the first woman of Asian descent to be appointed to the cabinet when she was tapped by Bush to be Labor Secretary in 2001. Born in Taiwan, she came to the U.S. at the age of 8 with her parents. She graduated from Mount Holyoke College and Harvard Business School. After she is confirmed by the U.S. Senate, Chow will take charge of agency responsible for carrying out Trump's campaign promise to refurbish the nation's roads and bridges. Her 8-year tenure as Labor Secretary included an overhaul of the rules governing overtime pay. Prior government service includes Director of Peace Corps, Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Transportation, and Chair of the Federal Maritime Commission. In private sector, Chow was President and CEO of the United Way of America, Vice President at Bank of America Capital Markets Group, and banker with Citicorp. More recently, she is listed as Distinguished Fellow in the Hudson Institute and is on the board of directors for News Corp. In 2015, she resigned from the philanthropic group run by former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg over that organization's campaign against coal. Democrats made an issue of Chow's affiliation with Bloomberg Philanthropies during McConnell's 2014 Senate re-election campaign. Roger Dow, CEO of the U.S. Travel Association, said he supports Chow and Trump's call for more investment in infrastructure. Secretary Chow distinguished herself during her 8 years at the helm of the Department of Labor and is exactly the kind of principled but pragmatic leader that can turn the bold infrastructure vision Mr. Trump articulated on the campaign trail into a beltway reality, Dow said. We look forward to working with Secretary Chow on federal transportation policies that are pro-connectivity, pro-growth, and pro-traveler, which will hopefully include proposals to address the dire condition of U.S. airports within the first 100 days. Greenpeace USA raised concerns over Chow's nomination based on environmental policy. Chow would be wise to convince her potential new boss that urgent action on climate change and innovation of public transit will protect American lives. And Greenpeace USA spokeswoman Cassidy Craighill, Chow's connection to institutions that manufacture climate denial, like the Heritage Foundation, requires the public demand she prioritize both public health and the impacts of climate change when managing our transportation infrastructure. In 2012, Chow's family donated $40 million to Harvard Business School, where Chow and her 3 sisters earned degrees. There's some pictures in this if you'd like to pull this up and take a look at this and some of the captions and stuff in this. It's an interesting article. The next one that we have for you is off of naturalnews.com, and it says Representative Tom Price, selected by Donald Trump for his HHS secretary, voted for the DARK Act to keep Americans in the dark about GMOs. This morning, President-elect Donald Trump announced his pick for Secretary of Health and Human Services, Representative Tom Price, a Republican from Georgia. Before serving in Congress, Price was an orthopedic surgeon, and he's well known for being a strong vocal critic of the Obamacare fiasco, or Affordable Health Care Act. He is exceptionally qualified to shepherd our commitment to repeal and replace Obamacare and bring affordable and accessible health care to every American, announced Donald Trump. Sadly, Tom Price is also among the many Republicans who voted for the so-called DARK Act, a bill that outlawed state-level mandatory GMO labeling laws like the one passed in Vermont. Mike Pompeo, a Republican from Kansas, also voted for the DARK Act and has already been appointed by Donald Trump to head the CIA. A vote in favor of the DARK Act means a vote against consumer transparency about what they're buying and eating in their food. It's a red flag against both Tom Price and Mike Pompeo, as it indicates they have both functioned as part of the Monsanto establishment that has long sought to keep people in the dark while feeding them unlabeled GMOs. The question on everyone's mind is, will these 2 individuals now represent the people, or are they still bought off by Monsanto? Analysis. Let's judge these people on what they do after Inauguration Day. What is my take on this? We all know that Monsanto has infiltrated every establishment and political party in America. It's almost impossible to find anyone in position of regulatory or legislative authority who hasn't already been influenced, threatened, or bought by deeply corrupt biotech industry. The overreach of corporatism in America is systematic and insidious. There is strong anti-establishment movement gaining steam in America and around the world. The election of Donald Trump is proof that the establishment, as it has long been known, is being rejected by the voters. Under the leadership of Trump, many legislators, officials, and cabinet members may now realize that they have permission to challenge the status quo in their own realms of government authority. If that happens, we might see people like Price and Pompeo exhibit a new level of responsibility in rejecting the corruption of the old system from which they emerged. Or on the flip side, we might see the opposite happen and watch in horror as the establishment swallows Donald Trump like a prehistoric tar pit, delivering nothing but the same old corruption and corporate collusion that typified the Hillary Clinton campaign. Only time will tell, but I assure natural news readers that we are watching carefully and will hold everyone in the Trump administration accountable for their actions. If they don't reject the corrupt status quo and start representing the interests of real Americans, they're going to be called out and rejected at the next election opportunity. The real test is what unfolds after January 20th. The same goes for Trump. Nobody gets a free pass. Everyone's held accountable. But let's not prejudge them at this point. Trump hasn't even been sworn in as president yet. The real test will be what unfolds after January the 20th, 2017. Only then will we know for sure what we voted into power in Washington. To keep it all in perspective, in my view, there's almost nothing the Trump administration can do that would be worse than President Clinton. But we didn't elect him to be the lesser of two evils. We elected him to make America great again, and that's what we demand of his administration. Tom Price can start by repealing Obamacare. That's incredibly important for all small businesses across America. From there, we're going to keep pushing Tom Price and Donald Trump to achieve important reforms for healthcare across America, including legalizing natural medicine, ending big pharma and market monopolies, and labeling all GMOs. How much we get of that is anyone's guess. My honest opinion is that nothing big changes until current system collapses. In my assessment, Donald Trump will be the last president of the 50-state United States of America. The financial collapse that's coming in 2017 will change everything, rendering many current government policies on healthcare and GMOs completely irrelevant. Stay tuned to Natural News to see what happens, and thank God we didn't end up with Hillary Clinton in the White House, as she was the bride of Frankenfood, who worked very closely with Monsanto and could be bought off with corporate money. And then there's a list here. It says, who voted for Dark Act to outlaw GMO labeling? And it is a very long list. A long list. It would take me too long to read the list. So if you would like to see that, you can pull this bad boy up and take a look at this. I mean, this thing, oh, good golly, it is forever long. And I bet you find some people in there if you pull it up and take a look at it. All these URLs are in the description of the video for your perusal. The next one we have here is off of regated.com, and it says, conservatism in the party of Trump. Nearly 3 weeks after the election of Donald Trump, and the right can breathe a sigh of relief. In vanquishing Hillary Clinton, America has been spared from World War III with Russia. Or have we? Well, we'll see. The aberration of our Constitution, the imposition of one-party rule through blanket amnesty, and quite possibly the beginning of slow death for the Republic. Galvanized by the leadership of President-elect Trump, the American people have beaten back the tide of establishment power in Washington, D.C. to restore the sovereignty of the governed over their government. With a Republican president, Republican-controlled Congress, and soon-to-be conservative-leaning Supreme Court, the next administration will have the power and the mandate to right the wrongs of 20-plus years of corporate rule. More significantly, with a strong cabinet to support the president-elect, Donald Trump will have possibly the last opportunity to radically reform American political institutions without violent insurrection. The nation waits patiently on the cusp of the next act in the 240-year American ascendancy, a great restoration, if only Trump can successfully adapt conservative principle to brutal political reality. Enter the present civil war within the Republican Party, just which principles will define American conservatism in the age of Trump. Throughout the election and already in the unfinished cabinet in the next administration, factions have begun to emerge and compete for supremacy in the new ruling party. While the dissonant cacophony of angry conservative voices raged together in opposition to a Democratic president and broken Republican establishment for 8 years, now this militia must govern. In the election, that silent majority found their voice in Trump, and this broad coalition is undefined or unified by little more than a shared hatred for the status quo. It is doubtful that an anti-trade, non-interventionist, big government, lifetime Democrat could rally Republicans from Maine to Arizona in any other year under different circumstances. Trump is a brilliant opportunist to craft such an impossible political campaign in this climate, but will be very difficult to transcribe his promises into policy on paper without vast swaths of anti-establishment constituency feeling betrayed in some way. Trump's Republican Party will orbit around his patriotic populist governing philosophy, which can be summed up so simply and elegantly as America first, a sharp departure from orthodox conservative methodology. The fabled parties of Goldwater and Reagan were defined by ideology, by hard principles such as constitutionalism, individual rights, and economic freedom. The tragic results of this high-minded approach to the nasty game of politics were, respectively, a crushing electoral defeat in 1964 and a series of small political gains reversed within a decade under George Bush and his New World Order. The party of Trump, like the party of Nixon, is a coalition which has been thrust into power to get things done. As conservatives, we admire Reagan's eloquence and his commitment to those timeless principles which have secured us for the American way of life, the only civilized way to live. But we also must come to grips with his abject political failure to institutionalize his own hard-fought reforms. 8 years of Reagan begot ruling elite of Bush's, Clinton's, and other connected insiders, which have pillaged the American taxpayer of his wealth, his liberties, and his political power for a quarter of a century. Trump's America's First model is not an expression of philosophy or sociology, but purely of policy, as it should be. The core tenets of America's new conservative party will not be long-winded commitments to utopian visions, but acute directions for government action. America First will manifest in 4 primary areas: immigration, trade, foreign policy, and institutional reform. On immigration, at long last, we will fulfill the 35-year-old Republican promise to secure the border with an impenetrable, physical, tall, powerful, beautiful southern border wall, and Mexico will pay for it. Not only will this promise be redeemed, but in this new party, immigration will be a priority, and it will be discussed from the axiom that immigration exists as a government program to benefit Americans. Trade will be a crucial issue to secure electoral gains in the Midwest and Northeast, so it should and probably will remain a central part of the Trump Party platform. This is probably the most decisive issue within the Republican camp, as it divides the free market fundamentalists and the left-leaning protectionists. But Trump has introduced practical compromise. The present trade arrangement is not free trade, and the advancement of intercontinental deals like the TPP, TISA, TTIP, NAFTA, and others promise national sovereignty. Both free traders and protectionists agree that these have to go, and in the meantime, Trump can campaign on this and win the Rust Belt. The president-elect will elicit even more derision still from the conservative establishment with his practical approach to world order. Thankfully, the party of Trump can reintroduce America to her default non-interventionist posture in foreign affairs. The Bush family and plenty of hawkish political institutions have worked very hard to brand non-interventionists as dangerous isolationists from the 1930s that will recreate Hitler, but in actuality, the Cold War and its interventions was the exception, not the rule, for American diplomacy. Eisenhower's military-industrial complex has overstayed its welcome by 25 years, and both small government and fiscal conservatives should invite Trump to follow through with his promise to end the perpetual war for global hegemony. The last and most important reform which Trump can graft on American conservatism is the anti-establishment crusade Drain the Swamp, which propelled him into office. While Trump has done the country a great service in simply defeating Hillary Clinton, and while he can make tremendous strides in immigration, trade, and foreign policy, he can be among the presidents on Mount Rushmore if he can fix Washington, if just for a moment. As Reagan and Obama learned the hard way, the most policy issues which face the nation are fixable through only a system of systematic corruption, or try that again, corrupt order which rules from the highest perches of power. If the ruthlessly pragmatic and patriotic lion of this populist revolution can shepherd the nation back to a system of self-government and sovereignty, then we can strive for conservative principle and its preservation. While we root for President-elect to make these changes and to succeed moving forward, conservatives must be wary of Donald Trump. Over the course of the last 19 months, it was necessary to present a unified front against such an ubiquitous enemy in the media, the establishment, and the Clinton machine to install Trump in office. Dissent and criticism against Trump was suppressed by a very vocal and dangerously psychophanic sect of the right, which was reasonable given the risk and perils that loomed with the possibility of Clinton White House. Now that the dust has settled and the revolution has survived, it is important to remember that Trump is a mortal man and now a politician with great power, and as such susceptible to the same corruption we task him to fight. The right gave him the White House and a favorable balance of power in Congress and the Supreme Court. It's our obligation to hold him accountable for his promises and for his actions as he governs. The current administration ought to serve as an example of self-destruction wrought by an absence of introspection. And if the right is to rise above the failures of the petulant narcissist currently in the White House, we have to hold Trump accountable in the next administration. There is a conservative renaissance on the horizon in America, and it can succeed if we commit Trump to principle as he governs pragmatically. And the last one I have for you is off of ronpaulinstitute.org. And this says, to really make America great again, end the Fed. And this is a Ron Paul weekly column. It says, former Dallas Federal Reserve Bank President Richard Fisher recently gave a speech identifying the Federal Reserve's easy money, low interest rate policies as a source of the public anger that propelled Donald Trump into the White House. Mr. Fisher is certainly the correct, or try that again. Mr. Fisher is certainly correct that the Fed's policies have skewered the middle class. However, the problem is not specific Fed policies, but the very system of fiat currency managed by a secretive central bank. Federal Reserve generated increases in money supply cause economic inequality. This is because when the Fed acts to increase the money supply, well-to-do investors and other crony capitalists are the first recipients of the new money. These economic elites enjoy an increase in purchasing power before the Fed's inflationary, policies lead to mass price increases. This gives them a boost in their standard of living. By the time the increased money supply trickles down to middle and working class Americans, the economy is already beset by inflation. So most average Americans see their standard of living decline as a result of Fed endangered money supply increases. Some Fed defenders claim that inflation doesn't negatively affect anyone's standard of living because price increases are matched by wage increases. This claim ignores the fact that the effects of the Fed's action depend on how individuals react to the Fed's actions. Historically, an increase in money supply does not just cause a general rise in prices, it also causes money to flow into specific sectors, creating a bubble that provides investors and workers in those areas a temporary increase in their incomes. Meanwhile, workers and investors in sectors not affected by the Fed generated boom will still see a decline in their purchasing power and thus their standard of living. Adoption of a rules-based monetary policy will not eliminate the problems of Fed-created bubbles, booms, and busts, since Congress cannot set a rule dictating how individuals react to Fed policies. The only way to eliminate the boom and bust cycle is to remove the Fed's power to increase the money supply and manipulate interest rates. Because the Fed's actions distort the view of economic conditions among investors, businesses, and workers, the booms created by the Fed are unsustainable. Eventually, reality sets in. The bubble bursts and the economy falls into recession. When the crash occurs, the best thing for Congress and the Fed to do is allow the recession to run its course. Recessions are the economy's way of cleaning out the Fed's created distortions. Of course, Congress and the Fed refuse to do that. Instead, they begin the whole business cycle over again with another round of money creation, increased stimulus spending, and corporate bailouts. Some progressive economists acknowledge how the Fed causes economic inequality and harms average Americans. These progressives support perpetual low interest rates and money creation. These so-called working class champions ignore how the very act of money creation causes economic inequality. Longer periods of easy money also mean longer, more painful recessions. President-elect Donald Trump has acknowledged that while his business benefits from lower interest rates, the Fed policies hurt most Americans. During the campaign, Mr. Trump also promised to make the Fed, part of his first 100-day agenda. Unfortunately, since the election, President-elect Trump has not made any statements regarding monetary policy or the Fed legislation. Those of us who understand that changing monetary policy is the key to making America great again must redouble our efforts to convince Congress and the new president to audit, then end the Federal Reserve. So that's what I had for you in this segment. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, share it around, leave your comments on what you like, what you think of the new format, and we'll see you in the next broadcast.